They laughed when I stood there with nothing in my hands. I can still hear it, low and careless, the kind of laughter people use when they believe the story is already over. I had just come from the courthouse, my coat still smelling like cold rain and old paper, and I didn't even bother to sit down. I stayed standing because something in me refused to fold, even then. My daughter crossed her arms, my son avoided my eyes, and my daughter-in-law smirked like she'd finally won a game I didn't know we were playing. "So," my son said, clearing his throat, "I guess that's it." That was how they framed it, not with sympathy, not with sadness, just relief, as if losing everything I owned was an inconvenience to them that had finally been resolved. I had raised that boy alone after his father died. I worked double shifts at the hospital, slept in my car more times than I'd ever admit, and sold my wedding ring to keep the lights on. I did it quietly. I did it without asking for praise. And now, standing in my own living room, at least the room that used to be mine, I realized something painful and sharp. They didn't remember any of it. Or worse, they remembered and decided it no longer mattered. The papers said the house was no longer in my name. The savings account I'd built over 40 years was gone. Everything had been signed, approved, and finalized while I was recovering from surgery. Perfectly legal, the lawyer had said, with that careful voice lawyers use when they want you to understand something without feeling responsible for it. My daughter-in-law leaned against the counter and asked where I planned to go, not out of concern, out of curiosity. "I'll figure it out," I said, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. They didn't argue. That hurt more than anger would have. My son nodded once, like a manager closing a shift, and went back to his phone. That was the moment I understood the balance had shifted. I was no longer the center of this family. I was excess weight. I packed that night. Just one suitcase, clothes, photographs, and the old wooden box I'd kept hidden at the back of my closet for years. They didn't ask what was inside. They didn't ask anything at all. As I closed the door behind me, I heard laughter again. Softer this time, confident, certain. They believed the story ended with me walking away in the dark, defeated and forgotten. They were wrong. The place I ended up wasn't much to look at. A small room above a closed bakery, smelling faintly of yeast and dust, with one narrow window that faced an alley. The landlord was an old man with tired eyes who didn't ask questions. I paid the first month in cash and thanked him more than once. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the city settle into sleep, every sound reminding me that this was real, that I had truly been erased from the life I built. For the first few days, I let myself feel it all, the humiliation, the grief, the quiet anger that crept in when I replayed their faces in my mind. But grief has a way of exhausting itself if you let it, and when it did, something else took its place: clarity. I opened the wooden box on the third night. Inside were documents wrapped in old cloth, letters written in my late husband's careful handwriting, and a small notebook I hadn't looked at in years. He'd always been meticulous, always thinking 3 steps ahead. When he was sick, he made me promise to keep these papers safe, even from family, even from our children if necessary. I'd thought he was being dramatic. Now I understood he was being careful. The house they took from me wasn't the only property in our lives. It was just the only one they knew about. Years ago, my husband had quietly transferred ownership of a piece of land we inherited from his aunt, placing it solely in my name. He'd also set up a trust, modest but protected, with instructions that couldn't be altered without my direct consent. At the time, it seemed unnecessary. Now it felt like a lifeline. I made a phone call the next morning, then another. I didn't rush. I didn't announce anything. I listened more than I spoke, letting professionals do what they were trained to do. The lawyer's tone changed once he reviewed the documents. Respect replaced pity. "You're in a stronger position than you realize," he said. Meanwhile, my children were enjoying their victory. I heard about it through mutual friends. Renovations planned, vacations booked, jokes made about how mom will be fine somewhere. Each story stung, but each one also strengthened my resolve. They believed comfort meant safety. They didn't realize how fragile their certainty was. One afternoon, my son called. His voice was casual, almost friendly. He asked if I'd settled in, if I needed anything. I could hear his wife in the background laughing. I told him I was managing. That was all. Silence can be a powerful thing when you stop using it to protect other people. At night, I walked the streets near the bakery, watching lights turn off one by one. I thought about the years I'd spent being small so others could feel large, about how easily love turns into entitlement when boundaries are never enforced. I wasn't planning revenge, not the loud kind anyway. I was planning balance. They thought they had taken everything. They hadn't even taken the most important thing. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under my door without ceremony. A cream envelope, heavy paper, my name typed neatly on the front. I knew before opening it that the ground was shifting. Inside was a formal notice regarding the property my children now lived in, the one they believed was fully theirs. The trust my husband created had conditions tied to it, conditions they had violated the moment they transferred ownership without my consent. The house was entangled, frozen, and subject to review. No eviction yet, just uncertainty, the kind that keeps people awake at night. I didn't celebrate. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the alley below. A stray cat crossed from shadow to shadow, careful and patient. I understood that feeling. The calls started 2 days later. First, my daughter, her voice brittle, asking if I knew anything about the letter they'd received. I told her I'd been resting. Then my son, his tone sharper, irritation leaking through forced politeness. "This is some kind of mistake," he said. I let the silence stretch long enough for him to hear himself. "Is it?" I finally replied. They came to see me the following weekend, all 3 of them. They stood in the doorway of my small room, eyes flicking over the peeling paint and narrow bed, discomfort written plainly across their faces. This was not how they pictured me. Power, I realized, often depends on imagination. When reality interrupts, it unsettles people. My daughter-in-law spoke first. She apologized, but the words felt rehearsed, carefully shaped to regain control. My son avoided my eyes, hands clenched and unclenched, like he was trying to hold on to something slippery. They asked what I wanted. That was new. I want honesty and acknowledgement. They exchanged glances. My daughter sighed and said they were under pressure, that decisions were made quickly, that they thought I'd understand. I nodded. I did understand. I understood perfectly how easy it was for them to choose comfort over conscience. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply explained the facts: the trust, the land, the conditions, the timeline. I told them the house would remain in limbo until things were made right. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because fairness mattered, because respect had to be restored before anything else could move forward. They left quietly. No laughter this time. That night, I slept better than I had in months, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped losing myself to silence. The resolution didn't come with shouting or tears. It arrived quietly, the way most real changes do. A revised agreement was drawn up. Apologies were offered, this time without performance. The house was returned to my name, not as a favor, but as a correction. My son signed the papers with shaking hands, his face older somehow, as if the illusion he'd been living under had finally cracked. I didn't move back in. That surprised them. They assumed restoration meant returning to the old shape of things, but I had outgrown it. I chose a smaller place near the water, somewhere mornings felt open and unclaimed. I brought only what I needed. The wooden box stayed with me, not as a shield anymore, but as a reminder. Our relationship changed. It had to. We spoke more carefully, more honestly. They listened now, not because they were afraid, but because they understood something had been broken and rebuilt differently. Trust, once fractured, never returns to its original form. It becomes deliberate, conscious. Sometimes my granddaughter visits. She sits at the table and asks about my life before all of this, about her grandfather, about the choices people make when they think no one is watching. I tell her the truth, gently, that love doesn't mean surrendering yourself, that kindness should never require erasing your worth. The laughter I once heard still echoes in my memory, but it no longer hurts. It reminds me how close I came to disappearing into someone else's convenience, and how choosing myself, quietly and firmly, changed everything. They thought the story ended when I walked away with one suitcase. In reality, that was the moment it finally began.